The carriage stopped hard outside the small cottage, and Duke Alexander Whitmore stepped out with a folded paper gripped tight in his hand. His jaw was set. His mind was made up. Today, he would end his marriage once and for all. He walked to the door and knocked twice, sharp and impatient, ready to face cold silence or bitter tears from the woman he had not seen in 6 months. The door opened slowly, and every plan he had prepared vanished in an instant. Standing before him was Alina, her hand resting on a round, heavy belly, her eyes wide with shock at the sight of him. The teacup in her other hand trembled and nearly slipped from her fingers. Neither of them spoke. The wind moved between them, carrying the smell of rain and fresh bread from inside the cottage. Alexander's eyes dropped to her belly, and his chest tightened with a feeling he could not name. He counted the months in his head, and the answer hit him like a blow. The child was his. Conceived on the last night they had spent together before she disappeared from the manor without a single word of goodbye. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Alina stepped back, gripping the door frame for balance, her face pale. "Why are you here, Alexander?" she asked quietly, though her voice shook with something deeper than surprise. He looked down at the paper still in his hand, the divorce agreement he had come to deliver, and suddenly it felt like nothing. Useless. Foolish. He shoved it into his coat pocket without a word. "You are carrying my child," he said, his voice low and rough, "and you never told me." Alina's eyes flashed with old pain. "You made your choice long before I made mine," she said. "I heard everything, Alexander. I heard you agree to marry another woman. I left so I would not have to watch it happen." Her words struck him harder than he expected. He had never agreed to marry anyone else, not truly, but he understood now how it must have looked to her, how it must have sounded through a closed door. The wind grew colder, and Alina wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, wincing slightly as she shifted her weight. Alexander stepped forward without thinking, his hand reaching to steady her elbow. She flinched but did not pull away. For a moment they simply stood there, two people bound by a marriage neither had wanted, now facing a child neither had planned for. "Let me in," Alexander said softly. "Let me understand what happened while I was gone." Alina hesitated, torn between the anger she had carried for months and the exhaustion of holding it alone. Finally, she stepped aside and let him pass into the small, warm cottage, the divorce papers forgotten in his pocket, replaced by questions he needed answered before he could ever think of leaving her again. Inside, the fire crackled low in the hearth, and Alina lowered herself carefully into a wooden chair, one hand pressed against her back. Alexander stood near the door, unsure whether he had the right to sit, unsure whether he had the right to be there at all. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning." Alina stared into the fire for a long moment before she spoke. She told him about the night she overheard his mother speaking with him in the study, discussing Lady Josephine, a woman from a powerful family, a woman his mother wanted for her son. She told him how his voice had sounded calm, agreeable, as if the matter was already settled. She had not waited to hear more. That same week, she packed a small bag and left the manor before dawn, taking nothing but a little money and her pride. Alexander listened without interrupting, his hands clenched at his sides. When she finished, he shook his head slowly. "I never agreed to marry her," he said. "My mother has been pushing that idea for a year, and I have refused every time. Whatever you heard only part of it." Alina's eyes searched his face, looking for the lie she expected to find but found none. Still, the hurt in her chest did not disappear so easily. "You were never warm toward me, Alexander," she said. "Our marriage was a business arrangement, nothing more. Why would I believe you chose differently now?" He had no easy answer for that. Their marriage had begun as a debt settled between two families, cold and practical, and he had kept his distance out of habit, not knowing how to be anything other than dutiful. He looked around the small cottage, noticing the neatly folded blankets, the simple shelf of books, the herbs drying near the window. It was humble, but it was clearly cared for. "How have you managed?" he asked. Alina allowed a small, tired smile. "The village has been kind to me. Mrs. Grady brings bread twice a week. Old Tom fixed my roof last month without asking for payment. I'm not as alone as you might think." Her words carried both pride and a quiet accusation, a reminder that she had built a life without him, that she had not needed him to survive. Alexander felt something shift inside his chest, a mixture of shame and admiration he had not expected. "I am not leaving," he said finally. "Not until I understand you and not until I know my child is safe." Alina opened her mouth to argue, but a sudden tightness crossed her face, and she pressed a hand to her side. Alexander was beside her in an instant, kneeling by the chair, worry replacing every trace of his earlier anger. "It is nothing," Alina said quickly, though her breathing had changed. "The baby moves often in the evenings." Alexander did not move away. For the first time since his arrival, Alina did not ask him to leave. Days passed, and Alexander did not return to the city. He told himself he was staying only to settle matters properly, but his actions said otherwise. He climbed onto the cottage roof one morning to fix a loose beam that had been leaking rain into Alina's kitchen. He carried water from the well before she could ask. In the evenings, he sat across from her by the fire, listening as she spoke about the child, about names she liked, about small fears she had never told anyone. Alina watched him carefully during these quiet moments, searching for signs that his kindness was only temporary, that it would vanish the moment his family called him back. Word of his presence in the village spread quickly, and it was not long before Lady Josephine arrived, her carriage rolling up the muddy road with obvious displeasure. She stepped out in fine silk, clearly unprepared for the simplicity of country life, and fixed her sharp gaze on Alexander. "Your mother is furious," she said without greeting. "You were supposed to finalize the divorce and return within the week. Instead, I hear you are playing husband to a woman who left you." Alexander's expression hardened. "Alina did not leave without reason," he said, "and she is carrying my child. That changes everything." Josephine's eyes flicked toward Alina's belly, and something like real surprise crossed her face before she masked it with a cool smile. "How convenient," she said softly. "A child, appearing just in time to save a marriage no one wanted." Alina, standing near the doorway, felt her cheeks burn with anger, but she held her tongue, refusing to give Josephine the satisfaction of a reaction. Alexander stepped between them, his voice firm. "You should return to the city, Josephine. There is nothing here for you." After Josephine left, tension lingered in the air like smoke that would not clear. That night, Alina could not sleep. She sat by the window watching the stars, thinking of every reason she had to keep her guard up. A soft knock came at her door, and Alexander entered carrying a cup of warm milk, a habit he had noticed helped her rest. "You don't have to do this," Alina said quietly. "Pretend to care only because of the child." Alexander set the cup down and knelt beside her chair, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "I am not pretending," he said. "I was foolish before, cold when I should have been kind, distant when I should have stayed close. I cannot change the past, but I can choose differently now." Alina studied his face for a long moment, searching for doubt, but found only quiet honesty. For the first time since he arrived, she allowed herself to believe, just a little, that something between them might still be saved. The peace did not last long. A week later, a grand carriage arrived at the cottage, and out stepped Duchess Margaret, Alexander's mother, dressed in dark green velvet, her face set in cold determination. She did not wait for an invitation before entering the small home, her sharp eyes sweeping over the modest furniture with clear disapproval. "So the rumors are true," she said, looking at Alina's belly without warmth. "You have trapped my son with a child." Alexander stepped forward immediately, his voice sharp. "No one trapped me, mother. This is my child, and Alina is my wife." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "A wife who ran away and hid your heir from you for months. That is not loyalty, Alexander. That is deception." Alina's hands trembled at her sides, but she forced herself to stand tall. "I left because I believed you had already chosen someone else for him," she said. "I did not hide anything out of malice. I hid because I was protecting myself." Margaret waved a dismissive hand. "Feelings are not my concern. What matters is the family name and the child's future. The baby will be raised properly in the manor under my guidance, while the two of you settle your divorce as originally planned." The room fell silent. Alina felt the floor shift beneath her, panic rising as she understood what Margaret was suggesting, that her child would be taken from her, raised by a family that had never accepted her, while she was cast aside entirely. Alexander's face darkened with an anger Alina had never seen in him before. "You will not take my child from its mother," he said, his voice steady but filled with quiet fury. "And there will be no divorce." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the folded papers he had carried since the day he arrived, the papers meant to end his marriage forever. Without hesitation, he tore them in half in front of his mother, letting the pieces fall to the floor. "Alina is my wife," he said. "She will be recognized as my duchess, and our child will grow up knowing both parents together, under one roof." Margaret stared at the torn papers, stunned into silence for the first time in the conversation. Josephine, who had been quietly informed of the visit, would later learn there was no engagement to salvage at all. Alina watched Alexander, tears gathering in her eyes, not from sadness but from a relief so deep it nearly overwhelmed her. Margaret's expression shifted slowly from anger to something more complicated, a flicker of understanding that her son had made his choice, and it was final. "You would give up everything for her?" Margaret asked quietly. "I would give up nothing," Alexander replied. "I would be gaining everything that matters." Months passed, and the cottage grew warmer with the changing seasons, filled with quiet laughter and the sound of Alina humming softly while she worked. On a cold morning in early winter, her labor began suddenly, sharp pain gripping her as Alexander helped her to bed and called for the village healer without wasting a single moment. Hours stretched long and difficult, and Alexander stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand through every wave of pain, refusing to leave even when the healer suggested he wait outside. When the cry of a newborn finally filled the small room, Alina wept with exhaustion and joy, and Alexander pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, whispering how proud he was of her strength. Their daughter was small and healthy, with Alina's soft eyes and Alexander's steady chin, and the moment he held her for the first time, something inside him settled permanently into place. News of the birth reached the manor quickly, and to everyone's surprise, Duchess Margaret arrived not with anger this time, but with a carefully wrapped gift and an uncertain expression. She stood at the doorway for a long moment before Alina invited her inside. Margaret approached the cradle slowly, looking down at her granddaughter with an emotion she had not shown before, something softer, something almost humble. "She has your eyes," Margaret said quietly to Alina, a small attempt at peace between them. Alina nodded, allowing herself a cautious smile. It would take time for old wounds to fully heal, but the first step had been taken. In the months that followed, Alexander proved his devotion not through titles or wealth, but through simple, steady actions, waking early to help with the baby, learning to cook so Alina could rest, sitting with her through sleepless nights without complaint. Alina watched him closely during these quiet months, and slowly the walls she had built around her heart began to come down, brick by brick, replaced by a trust that felt earned rather than assumed. The village that had once supported Alina in her solitude now welcomed Alexander as one of their own, impressed by a duke who chose humility over pride. On a warm afternoon, Alina sat outside the cottage with their daughter in her arms, watching Alexander repair a fence nearby, sleeves rolled up, laughter in his voice as he spoke to a neighbor passing by. She thought back to the day he had arrived with divorce papers in hand, ready to end everything they had, and marveled at how far they had traveled since then. The papers that once threatened to separate them forever now lay forgotten, torn and scattered, replaced by a family built on honesty, patience, and a love neither of them had expected to find. As the sun set gently over the countryside, Alexander joined them on the porch, wrapping an arm around Alina's shoulders while their daughter slept peacefully between them. And for the first time in either of their lives, everything felt complete.